Hello and welcome to my channel, where I summarize the best books on personal and professional development. Today, I'm going to give you a summary of Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist who reveals how we think and make decisions. This book is divided into 5 parts, each exploring a different aspect of our thinking processes. The main idea of the book is that we have 2 systems of thinking, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and emotional. It operates automatically and often without our conscious control. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and logical. It requires effort and attention to perform complex tasks. System 1 and System 2 work together to help us navigate the world, but they also have their limitations and biases. In this summary, I will highlight some of the most important insights from each part of the book and show you how you can apply them to improve your thinking and decision-making. Part 1, The 2 Systems. In Part 1, Kahneman introduces the 2 systems of thinking and explains how they interact. He also shows how System 1 can sometimes lead us astray by relying on heuristics, which are mental shortcuts that simplify complex problems. Heuristics can be useful, but they can also cause errors and biases. One example of a heuristic is the availability heuristic, which makes us judge the frequency or probability of an event by how easily we can recall examples of it. For instance, if we hear a lot of news stories about shark attacks, we might overestimate the risk of being bitten by a shark. Another example is the anchoring effect, which makes us rely too much on the first piece of information we receive when making a judgment. For example, if we see a product with a high price tag, we might think it's more valuable than it really is. To avoid these errors, we need to activate System 2 and check our intuitions with logic and evidence. We also need to be aware of our own limitations and biases and seek feedback from others who might have different perspectives. Part 2, Heuristics and Biases. In Part 2, Kahneman dives deeper into the heuristics and biases that affect our thinking and decision-making. He explains how System 1 uses various mental models to make sense of the world, such as stereotypes, narratives, and causal explanations. These mental models can help us understand complex situations quickly, but they can also distort reality and lead to mistakes. One example of a mental model is the halo effect, which makes us form an overall impression of a person or a thing based on one trait or feature. For instance, if we like someone's appearance or personality, we might also assume that they are smart or competent. Another example is the confirmation bias, which makes us seek and interpret information that confirms our existing beliefs and ignore or dismiss information that contradicts them. For example, if we believe that vaccines are harmful, we might only pay attention to stories that support this view and disregard scientific studies that show otherwise. To overcome these biases, we need to challenge our assumptions and test our hypotheses with data and experiments. We also need to expose ourselves to different sources of information and opinions that might challenge our views. Part 3, Overconfidence. In Part 3, Kahneman explores how overconfidence affects our thinking and decision-making. He shows how System 1 can make us overestimate our own abilities and knowledge, as well as the accuracy and validity of our judgments. He also shows how System 1 can make us underestimate the role of luck and randomness in our outcomes. One example of overconfidence is the planning fallacy, which makes us underestimate the time and resources needed to complete a task or a project. For instance, if we plan to write a book in 6 months, we might ignore all the possible delays and obstacles that might arise along the way. Another example is the hindsight bias, which makes us believe that we knew all along what would happen after an event has occurred. For example, if we predict that a team will win a game and they do win, we might think that it was obvious from the start. To reduce overconfidence, we need to calibrate our expectations and predictions with reality and feedback. We also need to acknowledge the role of uncertainty and chance in our lives and avoid making decisions based on hindsight. Part 4. Choices. In Part 4, Kahneman presents his groundbreaking work on prospect theory, which he developed with his colleague Amos Tversky. Prospect theory challenges the traditional economic theory of rational choice, which assumes that people make decisions based on maximizing their utility or happiness. Prospect theory shows that people are more influenced by their subjective perceptions of gains and losses than by the actual outcomes. People tend to be risk-averse when they face gains, and risk-seeking when they face losses. They also tend to overweight small probabilities and underweight large ones. This leads to various biases and errors in judgment, such as the endowment effect, the certainty effect, the framing effect, and the sunk cost fallacy. In this part of the book, Kahneman also discusses how people evaluate their well-being and happiness. He distinguishes between two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self lives in the present and feels moment-to-moment sensations and emotions. The remembering self constructs a narrative of the past and evaluates life events based on how they ended and how significant they were. Kahneman argues that these two selves often have different preferences and judgments, and that we tend to neglect the experiencing self in favor of the remembering self. He also introduces the concept of hedonic adaptation, which is the tendency of people to adjust to changes in their circumstances and return to a baseline level of happiness. He suggests that some factors that affect our happiness are more resistant to adaptation than others, such as social relationships, health, and freedom. He also proposes a measure of objective happiness called experienced utility, which is based on the duration and intensity of positive and negative emotions. Part 5. Two Selves. In the final part of the book, Kahneman summarizes his main arguments and implications. He reiterates that we have two systems of thinking, System 1, which is fast, intuitive, and emotional, and System 2, which is slow, deliberate, and logical. He warns that System 1 often dominates our decisions and judgments, even when we think we are using System 2. He also cautions that we are prone to overconfidence, hindsight bias, confirmation bias, and other cognitive illusions that distort our view of reality. He suggests some ways to improve our thinking and decision-making, such as being aware of our biases, seeking feedback from others, using checklists and algorithms, and adopting a more humble and curious attitude. He also advocates for a more nuanced and realistic approach to economics and policy making, one that takes into account human psychology and behavior. He concludes by reflecting on his own life and career, and acknowledging the contributions of his collaborators, especially Amos Tversky. He expresses his gratitude for having had the opportunity to explore the mysteries of the human mind, and hopes that his book will inspire others to do the same. That's it for this summary of Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more book summaries. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.